Hi, this is a computer build ASMR video, and after editing hours of footage, agonizing over the time consumption of what was supposed to be an ancillary project, I decided to further complicate things by constructing a physical set that matches the theme of the video. So here I am in a water-cooled PC. Interestingly enough, that is the closest I get to that method of temperature control. Because I am scared of water cooling. I don't know why. Anyway, I wanted to go with traditional fans for other reasons. Anyway, so months ago, I bought some visual effects plugins from Red Giant, and I ran into some trouble when I began working on an old project that uses more demanding effects. Every time I tried to render, I would get some kind of an error. So after talking to some folks at Adobe, who told me my CPU and GPU were poop, I bit the bullet and started with a new build. So now I have a marginally better computer, better capable of handling Red Giant products. For this video, we're going to get a little bit weird with ASMR layering, voice modulation, stuff like that. Some will like it, a lot are going to hate it, and I think my main goal is so I don't hate it. So I recorded the bulk of this video in one go, and then I had made some mistakes because I didn't know what I was doing, and I will be redoing the voiceover here and there, and I mix some of my normal talking voice in there, and I hope it doesn't sound too weird. Anyway, with all of that out of the way, I really hope you like it, and yeah, thanks again for watching. Enjoy.
Rest of their bones and souls delivering, thou art slave to fate and the schemes of desperate men.
Hi. So, this is the new computer, not built for aesthetics or games, or necessarily the best for graphics, with its Quadro P2000 graphics card, but it has the Intel i9-10900K CPU. The case is Lian Li's Lencool 2, which may not have been the best choice for cooling this power-hungry, hot processor. But okay, I lied. There, of course, was some aesthetic consideration. I mean, look at these lights. I went with Noctua fans, thinking that the white and brown would give more of a professional, modern workstation kind of a vibe. And the light cast by the RGB RAM makes the brown tolerable. Now this is where things get a little messy, because I kept fiddling with the fan configuration. The case came with 3 stock fans, all of which have been replaced by Noctua fans, both the silent and industrial type. This shot is slightly old, but what you're seeing here is a Noctua NFF12 120mm IPPC industrial fan next to a stock fan that was replaced by Noctua NFS 12x25, and I also added a Noctua NFA 14 IPPC on the top as an additional exhaust fan. I'm not going to claim this layout makes any sense, but it's what I've settled on, at least for now. I would also like to mention that this is my first build. The fact it's running at all is more than I expected. Anyway, I'm going to show you how I made it now. If you've watched my videos, you may be picked up on the fact that I tend to go overboard in hopes of speedrunning the learning curve. So obviously, I started out by picking up an electrical test kit. It does seem logical to me. I tested the closest outlet to make sure it was properly grounded. This is where I was going to ground the anti-static mat. I got the moderate extreme because I wanted a large work surface, and it has all kinds of helpful diagrams for parts. I have no idea what to do. It comes with a cord that connects the mat to a grounding source, and a static wrist strap that connects me to the mat. I like the color, and it seems well made. Not that I know. I didn't buy this for the placebo effect. I set the multimeter to detect 2M resistance, took the snap and placed it against the black poker thing, and stuck the red poker thing into the metal of the wrist strap. And as expected, the resistance was about 1. Allegedly, this proves the straps are functioning. I then clipped the grounding cord to the black, and then put the red against the metal snap. Again, it seems to be working. These can be snapped either at the top or the bottom corner of the mat. Here and here. And they swivel around the connection. The grounding cable was snapped at the top of the mat and then clipped to the grate of the power supply, which is turned off and plugged into a power bar, and the bar into the grounded socket in the wall that I tested, because I'm paranoid about being electrocuted, and 2 off switches are better than 1. Now for the components, and I don't know what they are because it's so dark in here, but I thought this shot was kind of cool. I went with the 10th generation Intel because it's a sweet spot between processor and cores for the type of programming I'm going to be using. I got the Asus Prime Z, that's Z490A, that was compatible with the CPU chip. It was basically the only thing available on Newegg that was mid-range, and that's all the research I did on that. The Vengeance RGB Pro Memory R4 32GB RAM, and 2 NVMe SSDs for the M2 slots on the motherboard. I still don't fully understand the reduced bandwidth that happens when using both slots. I might try the RAID thing. I got the Noctua U14S over liquid cooling because of its award-winning rating for sound, and 2 matching Noctua NFA14 140mm fans. I got more fans that you're gonna see later. Not shown here is the graphics card. I'll explain at install. Now for the case. The magnetic doors open like this and like this. The front lower compartment houses the hard drive gauge. One of these slots contains the accessories for assembly. The glass doors can be removed from their metal hinges, and the front pops off with pressure from the top. And there are dust filters at the front and a magnetic dust cover that goes on the outside of the top grille. The back has SSD mounts on the lower compartment door, and for display on the back panel, and there are back covers that go over the cables to make everything look neat and tidy. To get easier access, and because I didn't know where I wanted things yet, I took off all of the stock fans. For the first layout, I did end up using 2 of these fans on the bottom. They are not PWM and had to be controlled in BIOS. I decided to first remove from the boxes, but left them in their static bags. All of my reasons for choosing Intel made sense at the time. I don't remember that much anymore, just that all of the programs I use tend to not rely on the graphics card and are more CPU dominated. And the Intel isn't as nice to look at as an AMD. The Noctua is fairly large, and there may be a clearance issue when fitting it into the case. I did eye the specs, but admit to not fully thinking it through. Noctua does claim that the fan clears taller RAM. You can put the fan on the back if that becomes an issue. The fan comes with 2 sets of mounts and a back bracket. This I needed to install before putting in the motherboard because I thought the back would be inaccessible. Then you have the thermal paste, the low noise adapter, and the extra clips for a second fan. The 2 mounts have different lips, with the AMD being deeper. They include 3 instruction manuals for each type. I'm using the LGA 115 because it's the closest to the LGA 1200 socket of the i9. That means I use the flatter mounts, and I don't use the white and gray spacers provided. Instead I use the smaller black ones. I got the white RGB kind of RAM to match the case and shine some light onto this ugly brown CPU cooler. These are 2 sticks of 16 gigabyte 3600 megahertz. Finally, the SSDs. Now I took the motherboard out of the anti-static bag. The lever is meant to be pulled out and up with the protective cover following. I put the lever in front of the cover so it doesn't fall while installing. I lined up the arrows and notches and dropped it in. You're not going to get a satisfying shot of pulling down the lever and applying the thermal paste. Now we need to put the back mount for the CPU brackets, lining up the bags and the holes with the notches at the back. I placed the brackets for the CPU, lining up the middle holes, and then secured them with the screws. The RAM goes in the second slot, and the 4th slot. I'm always nervous to put pressure, so it's always been difficult for me to press hard enough to get it to click. Then I remove the heatsink that rests on top of the first M2 slot. The heatsink is designed to screw into the standoff furthest from the right. But these are 2280 NVMe's, which are shorter. The motherboard comes with attachable standoffs for these smaller cards and some cushions for one-sided NVMe's. If it were two-sided, you wouldn't use them. The NVMe is put into the slot at a 45-degree angle. I forgot to put in the screw at this point, but it's fine now. Then I removed the backing of the heatsink and screwed it back on. The second M2 slot doesn't have a heatsink, but it does have its own fan header. I put the motherboard into the case before doing the CPU cooler. The Asus Prime has a built-in I/O shield, and putting the boards in first helped hold it in place. At the back are the case cables for things like the USB sockets, on-off switch, SATA power supply, and addressable RGB. I slinked along the audio cable, plugged it into the header, and the case cables underneath, and the USB cable at the side. Now this may seem like a weird way to do it, but I decided to plug in the 24-pin and the 8-pin to the motherboard before attaching it to the power supply. I don't know why. I guess I thought my hands were small enough. I kept obsessing about whether or not I did the thermal paste right, and I got mixed responses from the people I showed it to. I did make a thread on a forum, and I was assured that my temperatures were normal for my CPU, which confirmed what I had previously read. So, by then though, I had watched too many redoing thermal paste videos, and I just had to do it for its own sake. And besides, I wanted to make the people I showed it to who thought it was funny proud, even though I don't actually end up doing that because I redid it wrong again. Beforehand, I let the computer run to warm up and soften the thermal paste. I took a lint-free shop towel with 99% IPA and dabbed away the old paste from the CPU and the CPU cooler base plate. I again applied the paste really weirdly and nervously. I can't actually tell if I used more paste this time. I kept trying to add and take away, but it's so sticky. At least it's a circle this time. I put the cooler on and screwed it down a bit. Took it off to see how it spread. I think I was really enjoying experimenting and repeating what I was seeing on YouTube. Okay, back to the original build. I had some trouble getting one of the screws on the cooler to thread, which sort of tripped me up on the back and forth counting, but did do it just the same. 3 turns one side, then the other side. The fan then needs to be clipped to the first set of ridges. When I was ordering my parts, I was kind of in a rush, so I just picked up 3 of these Noctua fans, because I always heard that 3 fans were the minimum case fans you needed. These are the 140mm fans. This case can fit a total of 4. They come with an extension cable, a low noise adapter, and silicone mounts with the normal screws if you want to reduce vibration. Originally, I had one of the case fans as the back exhaust, but later replaced it with a 120mm NFF12. Because I don't know very much about computers, and I rushed to buy the parts, I got the wrong kind of fan for the back of the case. I did not know the difference between static pressure and high airflow fans, and I also didn't know about CFM or negative versus positive case pressure or impedance curves either. Like I said, I had a NFF12 120mm PWM fan. That's the back exhaust. That is a static pressure fan intended to move air through things with high resistance, like grates and radiators. The NFF12 IPPC is also a static pressure fan, but because they move so much air, I felt it was still worth having. I know the upward airflow I have in the case is diagonal, which isn't great, but I wanted to be able to shut off the IPPCs during streaming, and this was the least essential place for it. When I realized my mistake, I ordered 2 of these Noctua NFA 12x25 PWM fans and the 140mm Noctua NFA 14 IPPC 3000 RPM fan to go with the NFA 14 on the top exhaust. I believe this is also static pressure, but again, it moves so much air that it doesn't really matter. The NFA 12x25 PWM also comes with anti-vibration and regular screw mounts, a Y splitter, an extension cable, and low noise adapters. These mounts are different in that the ends are longer. Basically, it's as if the other ones had been snipped. It also comes with an anti-vibration rubber fan gasket that dampens vibrations and reduces air loss when the fan is used with a radiator. One of these fans went next to the 120mm IPPC. The other 12x25 replaced the NFF12 PWM at the back of the case. These longer anti-vibration mounts were a lot easier to install as I had more to hold on to. I didn't want to return the NFF12 PWM, nor did I want it to go unused. Earlier in the video, I mentioned there would be a clearance issue. This is in relation to the first RAM slot and would come into play if and when I decided to upgrade the RAM. Later you're gonna see that this does happen because of the side of the computer case. A way to get around this that I had seen was to switch the 140mm fan to the back. I'd also seen two 140mm fans on either side. So I thought for fun, I'd try the static pressure fan on the side where the hypothetical RAM would go. It actually ran slightly warmer in this configuration, so I put the 120mm aside. Then I had the idea to squeeze it underneath the two 140mm fans at the front of the case, and it worked. They touch each other, but I didn't notice any discernible noise difference. Officially, the bracket at the front of the case can fit either 3 140mm fans or 2 140mm fans, like I originally had here. And of course, I made sure the wires were facing the back. I wanted to use the anti-vibration mounts for all of the Noctua fans. I don't know what I was doing wrong, but I found them incredibly difficult to pull through and ended up using a pair of tweezers. The best way is to pull it through while also pressing on the corner of the fan. But that's not always possible to do. It was only achievable with these two because of the removable bracket. I then put it back on with the fan, and I realized that the mounts would just slide down. But it doesn't matter now, because I added the third fan. Again, the cables go to the back of the case. I tried again to use the anti-vibration mounts while putting on the third 140mm fan, but couldn't get deep enough to get leverage because of the CPU cooler, and I settled on having one of the corners with a normal screw. I also had to make sure that with the top fan that I could still reach in and out to remove the fan on the CPU. Now it was time to do the GPU. Originally I was going to buy something low-end as a stand-in, and then I was going to replace it with the RTX 3060 Ti. And this was during the great GPU shortage, before NVIDIA had reduced the hash rate, limiting the cryptocurrency capacity of their cards. So, the only thing that seemed to be appropriate that I could get at the time was the Kit Quadro P2000 graphics card, which is also certified for use with 3D Studio Max. I know you don't need to pay for a Quadro card to use 3D Studio Max, but I have had driver issues in the past with the GeForce card. The holes for the screws didn't quite line up on the case, but was still able to get it to work. Or that's how it's supposed to be. I don't know. Now I'm gonna connect the fans. There are two official fan hubs here and here. There is also a 12-volt header for the second M2 slot. When I replaced some of the case fans, I installed a Thermaltake fan hub. It has 10 sockets. It needs a cable to connect it to the motherboard header, and a SATA cable connected to the power supply. I like how the right-angled one folds off in the middle. Plugging in the cable wasn't too difficult with my small hands, but it was done after installing the power supply, which we haven't got to yet in the video. To have the PWM fans work properly, you gotta have a PWM fan plugged into the socket under this glossy section. This fan controls the rest. I tried again to get the last anti-vibration mount into the top fan, and I cut my hands, so that's why I have a band-aid, and ultimately I ripped them out. I decided to mount the fan hub to one of the SSD brackets, and I thought that using an alcohol wipe would maybe help the sticky backing of the Velcro it came with adhere. Unfortunately, the Velcro itself is so strong, it just rips the whole thing off the case. At first, the back fan was plugged into a header on its own with an extension cable, but now it is plugged into the bottom right of the hub. Now to the IPPC fans, the loud 3000 RPM ones, which are attached to a Y splitter. This splitter is easy to unplug if I want a more quiet setup for streaming, but I also think I could have plugged them into a free header and disabled them in BIOS or something. I haven't touched them very much yet anyway, so right now it's not a big deal. These days, when I'm editing and rendering, it's interesting to note that the adhesion actually improved over time, and now I can remove it without any issues. I wonder if it's the heat. Now I gotta figure out where to install the operating system. I've had this for a while, from when I used to have a Blackmagic camera. I could have mounted it to the back of the case, either on the bottom door or have it displayed, but I went with installing it in the hard drive cage. To install the SSD, you line up the holes and screw it in place, then put it back in the cage. And here in the motherboard are the SATA connectors / sockets. From here you run the SATA data cable to the back of the SSD. It's actually now time to install the power supply. I probably should have done the SSD after this, but oh well. The hard drive cage is actually on a track that can be moved side to side after removing the screw. I had a really hard time moving the thing because it seemed to not be resting properly on the track, and I had to apply a lot of force, which kind of freaked me out. I needed to run a SATA cable from the power supply to the SSD and put it in first. I've been using the power supply to ground myself, and thus had to remove the power cord and the clip that connected it to the grounding mat. Once it was in, I put the plug back in and clipped the mat connector to one of the screws holding the power supply. I later moved the clip back to the grill. I have no idea if this is helpful at all. The SATA power connector now needs to go into the back of the SSD. Again, I wouldn't recommend plugging these cables in after installing like I did, but my hands are small enough, and I moved the cage for extra room and was able to connect the 24 and the 8-pin cables previously installed on the motherboard. Then I moved the cage back to its original position, again with much difficulty. Then there was this one case cable that I'm going to connect to the same cable powering the SSD. So most of these cables can squeeze under the back plates, except for one, and it should be okay to have a cable hanging by the back of the motherboard as long as it's insulated. Then all that was left was to replace the glass doors and the front panel. I plugged in the Windows 10 installer into one of the USB sockets and flipped the power switch. The lights on the motherboard went on and turned on the computer. I couldn't believe it actually worked. So here is the really boring stuff. All I did here was make sure in the original layout that all of the stock fans were controlled with DC and not PWM. I had an issue installing Windows onto the SSD. I was informed upon attempting installation that the SSD had an MBR partition table and needed to be converted to GPD. So just to fill in with lit disk and disk part and whatever, and then I was able to install Windows. And nobody really cares about the rest, or at least I don't care. And that concludes the video. I hope you liked it, and I hope that the added ambiance of the setup added to the enjoyment of the video. And I hope that the new computer inspires me to do more effects-driven stuff. I think it will. So thank you very much for watching, and I'll be seeing you around. Okay. Bye-bye.